18, 17, 14, 11, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, we're ready to start. Okay, so this is the second morning session of Saturday of September 1st. Okay, so now that we've gone through the sense bases and the elements, I want to go into the Abhidhammata Sangaha, the comprehensive manual of Abhidhamma, in order to show what kinds of chittas, what kind of consciousnesses arise through the different sense doors. So we speak about the ayatanas, the sense bases, as being the doors and objects for the arising of consciousness. And the way it's done in the suttas is by way simply of the 6 types of consciousness, from eye consciousness, ear, nose, tongue, body, mind consciousness. But in the Abhidhamma, the Abhidhamma itself presents a very complex systematization and classification of the many different types of consciousness that can arise. And in the Abhidhamma, consciousness is reconceived as a series of momentary acts of consciousness, which are called, each moment of consciousness is called a citta. So the citta is an event, they call it a consciousness event, by which a particular state of consciousness arises, taking a particular object, performing a particular function. And in the Abhidhamma, the Pali or Theravada Abhidhamma, the cittas are classified as of 89 types, or in more detail, 121 types. I'm not going to go into all of these types. I just want to take a broad overview of the types of cittas, which will be enough for our purposes to see what kind of cittas arise through which of the sense doors. And so we see that the basis for classification of the cittas in the Abhidhamma, first it's by way of sphere. So we have the 3 mundane spheres, the sense sphere cittas, those that pertain to the world in which sense desire is predominant. The fine material sphere cittas, the cittas relating to the jhanic attainments and their objective counterpart. The immaterial sphere cittas, the cittas relating to the immaterial or formless meditative attainments. And then beyond the 3 mundane spheres, we have the supramundane cittas. These are the cittas, states of consciousness, pertaining to the paths of liberation, and then the fruits of liberation. As I said, I'm just treating this in a very broad way, so I don't want to get bogged down in the details. Okay, and then what's most important, after the division of cittas by way of the sphere of occurrence, is the moral or ethical quality of the cittas. So the basic distinction is into the unwholesome cittas, which are those rooted in greed, rooted in hatred, rooted in delusion, and the wholesome cittas, the cittas rooted in the good roots, non-greed, non-hatred, non-delusion. And then besides the unwholesome cittas and the wholesome cittas, there are various types of resultant cittas. So there's the results of the wholesome, results of the unwholesome, results of the wholesome, and then these are rootless. Then there's beautiful sense sphere resultants, beautiful fine material sphere resultants, beautiful immaterial sphere resultants, and then the fruits are resultant types of cittas. And then there are certain other cittas which are called functional cittas. These are cittas not wholesome, not unwholesome, not the results of karma, but these are cittas that just perform certain basic functions in the process of cognition. We'll see what these are on the basis of the next chart. Which is a chart that shows a process of cognition. Now, according to the Abhidhamma, cittas occur in certain fixed sequences. So it's not that they don't occur just at random, this citta arises, that citta arises, but there are particular laws according to which cittas arise in a sequence so that one citta builds upon the other citta when we are cognizing objects, being aware of objects, processing objects. Okay, so a process of citta, this is, first we have a division of the cittas into the passive flow of the mind and then active processes of the mind. So the passive flow of the mind is called the bhavanga. So whenever the mind is not actively engaged with an object, then it's flowing along in this quiescent state, which is a series of cittas arising and passing away, all of the same type. Okay, but when a sense object impinges on a sense faculty, then an active consciousness, or an active process of consciousness occurs. And so this diagram illustrates a process that occurs in the eye door. So this is a process that is going to occur when a visible form strikes upon the eye. Okay, you could see here that we have this stream of the bhavanga flowing on. And now the visible form has come into range. It's struck on the eye. And when it strikes on the eye, one more moment of bhavanga goes by. That's called the past bhavanga. But then, because of the impact on the eye, it's said that the bhavanga citta, metaphorically speaking, it vibrates. In other words, that there's some kind of disturbance to that passive flow of the bhavanga. Maybe we could compare this a little bit to if you're sound asleep and you have the alarm set. Then when the alarm goes off, even before you're aware that the alarm goes off, just when the beeping is taking place, there's a disturbance to the sleep. before you wake up and you realize the alarm is ringing. So that sort of disturbance to the bhavanga, that's called the vibrational bhavanga. So it occurs actually twice. The second time, the bhavanga stops. Then there arises a citta, which is called the five-door adverting consciousness. So this citta, this is a simple functional citta, and it has the function of turning to one or another of the five sense doors, wherever that disturbance has occurred. If it was a sound, in this case, this is an eye-door process, so the five-door adverting consciousness will turn to the eye door. It'll direct the consciousness to the eye door. If it were a sound striking on the ear, then the five-door adverting consciousness would turn to the ear door. If one had caught the fragrance of a nice perfume or something foul-smelling, then the five-door adverting consciousness would turn to the nose door. And when we're eating a meal, then countless times the five-door adverting consciousness is turning to the tongue door. Okay, so it can turn to any of the five doors wherever there is something, an object, impinging on, striking on one or another of the five sense doors. Okay, now in this case, it's a visible form striking on the eye. So after the five-door adverting consciousness, there arises a moment called the eye consciousness. The eye consciousness is just one very simple moment of one very simple citta, which its function is somewhat just to take in the form of the object. The eye consciousness doesn't know what form it's seeing. It doesn't have any knowledge. It's not like if I see, okay, this, I know that this is a microphone. If I see Venerable Panyarakita here, the eye consciousness doesn't know that's Venerable Panyarakita. The eye consciousness just takes in like a colored shape, that's all. And it's just like one split second taking in colored shapes. Then it's followed by another moment which is called the receiving consciousness. This receiving consciousness sort of receives the object that's taken in by eye consciousness. And just to go back a step, if it was a sound that was striking on the ear, instead of eye consciousness here, one would have ear consciousness. Similarly, with an odor, you would have nose consciousness. Tasting, you would have tongue consciousness. Some kind of bodily sensation, body consciousness. So in this role, in this position, number 5, there occurs the bare sense consciousness. And then that's followed by the receiving consciousness, in which the mind sort of takes in the object that has appeared to the sense consciousness. Okay, then after the receiving consciousness, there arises another citta called the investigating consciousness, Santirana citta, that sort of very briefly investigates the object. And then comes a citta called the determining consciousness, which has the function of determining what is the object that appeared to eye consciousness. And then comes a series of 7 cittas, always, or in normal sense consciousness, this type or this phase of cognition consists of 7 cittas, all of the same type. This phase is called javana, and it's in this phase that one reacts to the object that has appeared at the sense door. So all of these cittas, up to the stage of determining, are in a sense automatic, passive cittas, which are just bringing in the object and determining what is that object. But it's in the javana phase that one responds to the object in a way that might be wholesome, if one responds with any of the wholesome qualities of mind, or unwholesome, if one responds by way of greed, hatred, delusion, or any of the other defilements. So that is called the javana phase. And then when the object is particularly clear and distinct, then there'll take place 2 moments which are called registration, where one registers, in a sense, the impression made by the object. And then after that, there comes the drop back into the bhavanga. Okay, now in terms of the dhatus, we spoke about the 18 dhatus. Let's pick up from the 5-door adverting consciousness. Let me I'll start with the eye consciousness. So here we have eye consciousness. In this position, there could be ear, nose, tongue, or body consciousness. So we could see that of the 7 types of consciousness dhatus, 5 of them, this phase would cover 5 of them. So the eye consciousness element, ear consciousness element, nose consciousness element, tongue consciousness element, body consciousness element will come in position number 5. So 5 consciousness elements are taken care of. Now the 5-door adverting consciousness and the receiving consciousness belong to the mano dhatu, the mind element. But the 5-door adverting consciousness is of one kind. Ethically is of one kind. It's a bare functional consciousness. But the receiving consciousness can be of 2 kinds. That is, it can be a unwholesome resultant or a wholesome resultant. If there's a disagreeable object, in the case of eye consciousness, a disagreeable form, some kind of unpleasant form, then the receiving consciousness will be the eye consciousness will be an unwholesome resultant, and the receiving consciousness will be an unwholesome resultant. If it's an agreeable form, then the eye consciousness will be a wholesome resultant, and the receiving consciousness will be a wholesome resultant, results of wholesome karma from the past. And so in that way we have 2 types of eye consciousness, 2 types of receiving consciousness. And now those 2 types of receiving consciousness also are included in the mind element, the mano dhatu. And so we have 3 cittas in the mind element. We have the mind door adverting, that's one citta, one kind of citta, and the receiving consciousness, two kinds of consciousness, unwholesome resultant, wholesome resultant. So those make three, right? One five-door adverting, two receiving consciousnesses. Those three are the mind element. And then, as I said, with the 5 types of sense consciousness, 5 of them will be unwholesome resultant, 5 will be wholesome resultant. So altogether, the sense types of consciousness will be of 10 cittas. So we have 10 and 3. So what is that? 10 plus 3, 13. And then in the Abhidhamma there are 89 cittas. So we take 13 away from 89, and that leaves 76 cittas, which are considered mano vijnana dhatu, mind consciousness element. Okay, shall I go over that again? Okay. Okay, first we take the 5 types of sense consciousness, eye consciousness through body consciousness. So each of those can be of 2 kinds, depending upon whether it's an unwholesome resultant or a wholesome resultant. That is, whether it's a result of unwholesome karma or a result of wholesome karma. So according to the Abhidhamma, the 5 types of sense consciousness are always karma results, karma resultants. And depending upon the karma that lies behind them, they can be an unwholesome resultant, that is when there's a disagreeable form, because it's through unwholesome karma that one encounters disagreeable objects. Or it could be a wholesome resultant, that is, if the wholesome karma is coming to maturity, and then one encounters agreeable objects. Okay, so the 5 types of sense consciousness can be of 2 types, unwholesome resultant, wholesome resultant. So that's 5 times 2 makes 10. So in the Pali they call this the Dvi Pancha Vijnana. Dvi means 2, and Pancha is 5, and Vijnana is consciousness. So we could say the 2 types of 5-fold sense consciousness. So those are 10 cittas. Okay, then we come to the preceding moment. This is the 5-door adverting, which, as I said, just has the function of turning to one or another of the 5 doors through which an object strikes on one or another of the 5 sense faculties. So that is just one citta. It's not an unwholesome resultant, not a wholesome resultant. It's a simple functional citta. It just has its very simple role to perform. And then, after the sense consciousness, after the eye consciousness or ear consciousness, and so on, there is the receiving consciousness that takes in the sense object. And that is also a karma resultant. And it can be unwholesome resultant or wholesome resultant. So that is of 2 kinds. And so we have the 2 receiving consciousnesses, and the one five-door adverting consciousness, those three are grouped together as the manodhatu, the mind element. And so we have 10 types of sensory consciousness. That's the two sets of fivefold sense consciousness. And then the three chittas that belong to the manodhatu. So altogether 10 plus 3 is 13. And then we have a total of 89 chittas in the Abhidharma. I can't get them at two at the same time. So we have a total of 89 chittas, as you'll see if you turn to page, I think it's 28 in your manual. So then you take away, you deduct those 13 from the 89, then we have 76 chittas left, and those all belong to the mano-vijnana dhatu, the mind consciousness element. Now this is a process that occurs through the physical sense doors, the 5 physical sense doors, but there's a process that occurs purely through the mind door, and it's a little bit different in some respects. Okay, here is a process. Let me increase the size of this. So this is a process that occurs through the mind door. It's called limited because this is occurring with the sense sphere object. It's not the process that occurs in the jhanas or with the supramundane attainments. But if one is thinking a thought, entertaining an opinion, entertaining some kind of mental image. Okay, so here we have we'll take it with a clear object. We have the flow of the bhavanga, the life continuum. Then the object appears, and internally, it's not appearing through the senses, but internally, through the internal mind organ, the organ of thought and reflection. So when that object appears, it arises up and sort of strikes on the bhavanga. So the bhavanga vibrates, and then it gets cut off. The bhavanga is cut off. With a purely mental object, we don't have a sense consciousness, we don't have the receiving, we don't have the investigating, but it goes from the arrest or stopping of the bhavanga. The next moment that arises is called the mind door adverting, where the mind turns to the internal object, the object that's entertained by the mind organ. And then comes the sequence of jhavanas, in this case 7 jhavanas, which are reacting or responding to the object. Then come 2 moments of registration, and then the bhavanga returns. And we have to bear in mind that according to the Abhidharma, like this whole process goes by just so quickly that it's like the fraction of the snap of a finger, like 1,000th or 100,000th of a snap of a finger. This whole process is going by. And so in this process, we don't have any of the mano-dhatus. All of these are mano-vijnana dhatus, mind consciousness elements. Okay, from this, I hope that this isn't getting too too difficult and too perplexing. But I want to jump now to see which chittas arise through the different sense doors. And for that, we go to the table in chapter 3. Okay, now this section of the Manual of Abhidhamma, this is in chapter 3, so it has a section called Analysis of Doors. And the doors are another term for the internal sense bases, the way they're understood from a sutta perspective. And they're called doors, the internal sense bases. Actually, there's two different metaphors. The metaphor of a base is a foundation upon which something stands. And so we can say that I consciousness stands upon the I door, and the object, or the I consciousness stands upon the I and upon the object. And so the I and the object are the base for I consciousness. And so with the other types of ayatanas. But here we're using a different metaphor. This is the metaphor of the door. So we could say that the door is, you use a door to enter a building, those from the outside come in, and those on the inside go out the door. So using this metaphor, we could say that the eye, ear, nose, tongue, and body, and the mind are doors in that the consciousness goes out through these doors in order to meet the object, sort of to shake hands with the object. Or again, we could say that these are doors because it's through these organs, eye, ear, nose, tongue, and so on, that the object gets admitted inside in order to encounter consciousness. So in any way, the doors, that's the passage through which consciousness gets the opportunity to meet its corresponding object. And so we have 6 doors. And so the commentary here says that the term door is used to denote the media through which the mind interacts with the objective world. So it's the 6 sense doors by which the citta, the mind, and the mental factors go out to meet the object, and by which objects enter into range of the citta and chaitasikas, the mind and mental factors. And so for the 5 sense organs, it's the sensitive matter in each of those 5 sense organs that is designated the door. So I explained that earlier, that sensitive matter inside the eye, the ear, the nose, spread out over the tongue, extended over the body, that is the door for eye consciousness, ear, nose, tongue, body consciousness. And then the life continuum, that's the bhavanga, is called the mind door. Because when there's no external sense process taking place, then ideas, images, thoughts, judgments, emotions, and so on enter through the bhavanga and become available to the mano-vijnana, to the mind consciousness. Okay, so what kinds of consciousness arise in the eye door? Okay, so the text says that there are 46 chittas, 46 types of consciousness occur in the eye door. Okay, first there's the 5-door inverting consciousness. We saw that in the diagram. Okay, then comes eye consciousness itself, by which one actually sees the form, just the color that makes up the form. Then the receiving consciousness, which takes it in. Then the investigating consciousness that investigates it. Then the determining consciousness that determines what the object is. And then the 29 types of sense sphere jhavanas. We don't have to go into them, but the most important feature about them is that these sense sphere jhavanas, these will be the unwholesome chittas, the unwholesome states of consciousness, and the wholesome states of consciousness. And then there are 8 types of registration consciousness. Again, in this class, I won't go into details. Okay, so this takes us into 46 types of consciousness arise in the eye door. And in the case of the ear door, in the case of the ear, nose, tongue, and body door, it should be the same kind of process. The only thing that's different is that instead of eye consciousness, here one would have ear consciousness, so we would just replace 2 kinds of ear, nose, tongue, or body consciousness. But everything else would be the same. Okay, so here we have 46, and now we have 46, 4 more types, which can be of 2 qualities, so that's 8 more. So we have 46 plus 8, and so we get 54 types of sense sphere consciousness occur in the 5 sense doors. In the mind door, it's more complicated because there are various kinds of chittas that can occur in the role of jhavana only in the mind door, but not through the sense doors. Okay, so here we have 55 jhavanas. I don't remember the totals, but we don't have to be concerned with that. Okay, maybe at this point I'll ask whether there are any questions that have come up in the course of the presentation. And please always take the wireless mic.
Hi, my name is Brian. So the question I had was, I don't know if the statement was made, but is it safe to say that, essentially everything that comes through the eye door, the ear door, etc., are neither wholesome nor unwholesome.
Wait, say again.
They're neither wholesome nor unwholesome until, I guess you're thinking about it, Just hearing any noise, seeing any sight, they're neither wholesome nor unwholesome.
Did you say either or neither?
Neither.
They're neither. That is correct.
Okay.
That is correct.
Okay.
Yeah. We
Thank
call the ear, say the eye consciousness, the ear consciousness, and so on, they're said to be wholesome resultant and unwholesome resultant. Not that they are wholesome themselves or unwholesome themselves, but this means that they are the result of the wholesome, the result of the unwholesome. So the types of sense consciousness represent the ripening of past karma. But in themselves, they're karmically neutral.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, the karma gets created in the phase of the javana. The javana is what creates the karma. Any further questions? Yes, please.
Bante, Fenglen Ang. During my practice of meditation, there's interruption where I'm thinking about something or whatever, but it interrupts the meditation process. Why is that happen? Is that the bhavanga? Is the mind door opening up to something? What is actually going on during this meditation?
Okay, this is the way I would try to explain it in Abhidhamma terms. Okay. Okay, usually the mind is occupied with things that are appearing through the senses. Okay, when one sits in meditation, then one is stopping the engagement of the mind with objects through the senses. And one is trying to keep the mind focused on either a single object or just opening the mind to whatever is appearing. And so I would say that this attempt at restraining the activity of the mind has a kind of unleashing of effect, of sort of opening up the doors of the bhavanga to all of the impressions that have been stored within the bhavanga, which now start flowing up, sort of rising up and streaming through the door of the bhavanga and then coming into active consciousness. Yeah, so for this reason, sometimes people who have, when they begin practicing meditation, if they haven't practiced meditation before, they think that previously I had a nice, balanced and settled mind, a calm mind, but now that I've started to practice meditation, my mind is just becoming chaotic. But this is because they're becoming aware of things that were going on sort of at the subliminal level that didn't enter into conscious awareness.
Okay.
But now all of those subliminal sort of cognitive processes are now sort of getting illuminated by the light of awareness.
Is there a way or a process to prevent it while practicing meditation? Is there something in the mind that I can control to make it not happen?
No.
No. Oh, okay.
All you have to do is learn how to deal with it skillfully, and not be upset by that.
Right.
But of course, it's not a way to make this, to prevent this from happening, but what one has to do is learn how to deal with that skillfully. And so what one does to deal with it skillfully is to note what is arising and then let it go and bring the mind back to the object. And then as one continues with the practice, and this, maybe for most people it would require like a long-term retreat situation, because as one is going through the process of focusing the mind again and again on the same object, 8 to 10 hours a day, day after day, then the mind is building up a momentum of focus on the object. So then gradually that the play of thoughts and images and imagination and so on starts to settle down, and then the mind comes to rest consistently and steadily on the object.
Okay. One more question. During the practice of meditation, the gap in breathing between the in-breath and the out-breath, is that where it comes into?
Is that where?
Is that where it surfaces?
That is one of the places that sort of gives an opportunity for the thoughts to come in.
Okay.
Because what tends to happen is, say, if one is breathing in, then one will be aware, breathing in,
Right.
breathing in, breathing in.
Right.
But then when you come to the end of the in-breath, just before the out-breath starts,
right.
In that gap, there's a tendency for the mind to drop the breath, and then the thought will start to come up. And so one has to be particularly sharp when coming to the end of the in-breath and coming to the end of the out-breath.
Okay. Oh, that's very good. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I see somebody, I think, is that no? Okay, please, yeah. Yeah, it's you with the black shirt.
Hello again.
Yeah.
Hopefully today I can word my question a little better. So you, back to what you were talking about earlier, you said dealing with these skillfully, like the cheetahs, the events that come up. I guess my question comes from, how does focusing on or drawing your attention to and then acknowledging and then I guess letting go of that, how does that process bring about, I guess, the wisdom or clarity? How does, I guess, identifying the cheetah, the thing, and being able to label it in your mind, how does that help you overcome and deal with it skillfully?
Okay, these unwholesome mental states, we call the defilements, the way they get to be active in the mind and to control the mind is by hiding beneath the screen of unawareness. Okay, so when we're not aware of them, then they have the opportunity to function actively and to gain power and strength. And they don't meet with resistance because we're not acknowledging them. And so the first step that has to be applied to deal with them skillfully is to become aware of them, to recognize them, to acknowledge them. So that in itself is not sufficient. That, we could say, is the activity of one of the activities of mindfulness, of right mindfulness, and clear comprehension. Mindfulness is what makes one aware of the state of mind. Clear comprehension is what identifies the state of mind. But there also has to be the effort, the right effort, which is the effort not to allow those unwholesome mental states to control the mind and to govern the mind. And so one has to apply right effort to eliminate that unwholesome state and to bring into being the wholesome mental states that are opposed to them. And often just being aware of the basic object of meditation is bringing into being those wholesome mental states that will keep the unwholesome mental states away. So, for example, when one is taking as the object the in and out breathing, so it seems in and out breathing in itself doesn't seem particularly beautiful and wholesome, not particularly unwholesome or unskillful, but it's just a natural process, in and out breathing. But when one applies the mind to be aware of the breath with the aim of gaining concentration, samadhi, one is bringing into being a particular set of mental factors which have the power to put aside, to remove the unwholesome mental states, the hindrances. So one is bringing into being mindfulness, one is bringing into being clear comprehension, one is bringing into being the use of apply the mental application and attention to center the mind on that object. And as that mindfulness, comprehension, attention gain in strength, then it builds up a kind of wall that will keep out the unwholesome states and keep the mind focused steadily on the in and out breath. And as that focus increases in momentum, then it leads to samadhi, to one-pointed absorption in the breath.
Thank you.
Okay. Tara? Somebody online?
We have an online question here. The question is, the concept of the Bhavanga Citta is anywhere to be found within the suttas?
Okay, the question, is the concept of the Bhavanga Citta to be found in the suttas? No. It's an idea that came in the Abhidhamma. And what's interesting is that we don't even find it in the earlier books of the Abhidhamma, but it comes, maybe it starts to gain prominence in the last book of the Abhidhamma Pitaka, called the Patana, the book of conditional relations. Okay, yeah, take the microphone.
Bhante, the question has asked about when the Kamba is the Javana state or whatever, right?
Yeah, but it's in the Javana state that the karma is created.
But my question is, now this is all in terms of the different senses.
Yeah.
Information coming through the differences and your reaction.
Yeah.
But isn't most of the karma, is although originated through the mind, also by your action? For instance, killing someone.
Yeah.
If you don't do that.
That's a good point. That's a very good point.
Yeah.
Okay, but the answer to that would be that all of those actions are expressions or manifestations sort of Abhidhamma interpretation of those verses. So mano pubangama dhamma, mano seta, mano maya, mano sacha patutena bhasati va karoti va. So the verse says that mind is the forerunner of all dhammas, that they are all, mind is the chief, they are all made by mind. Then if one speaks or acts with a defiled mind, then suffering follows, just as the wheel follows the foot of the ox. Okay, so how is mind the forerunner of all dhammas, of all actions, but in terms of what one does and what one speaks? So that is the chaitana that arises in the javana stage as a factor of the mind. So that is what gets expressed through bodily action and through speech. And so looked at from an Abhidhamma perspective, one says that it's the javana that's motivating the unwholesome bodily actions and unwholesome verbal actions, that's creating the unwholesome karma. And again, it's the javana that occurs in the wholesome javana process that is creating the wholesome actions of body and speech and generating wholesome karma.
What is action itself?
Take the microphone.
If you go ahead and kill,
Yeah.
I'm sorry. No, instead of, I understand that, but also if they continue the process and do the action of taking someone's life,
Yeah.
right? At that time is again another series.
Oh yeah, there are.
Yeah, that's my question actually.
Yeah, there are processes of chittas going on throughout that whole act of killing. As I said before, a process of the chittas just occurs in the fraction of the snap of the fingers. And so in the act of killing, well, especially if it's like using a knife, then it will require many, many processes to complete that act of stabbing somebody. If it's shooting with a gun, then it requires fewer, sorry to say this, but it requires fewer processes of chittas to pull the trigger and kill somebody. Okay, I think, oh, somebody else. Okay. Okay, Matt first, then from the internet.
Abante. So the javanas bring to the mind door either a wholesome or unwholesome awareness of, and then it's the mind door which would decide whether they were going to act on the wholesome or unwholesome impulse from the javanas. So the right effort has to occur within the mind door after the javana process is completed. And you're aware that, oh, there's an urge to complete an unwholesome act, but there's something at another level of the mind door is saying that is becoming aware that that is an unwholesome impulse and decides not to complete it. So, do you want?
I'm not quite sure they
you have the mind door after the mind door adverting process where it receives the javana with unwholesome or wholesome karma impulse, decides, recognizing that it is an unwholesome impulse, says, no, I'm not going to follow through with the craving or the clinging that is emerging from the javana process. So how does that, where does that application come from, this awareness of I'm sort of feeling a desire to do something unwholesome.
I'm having a little trouble catching what you're saying because
I'm sorry.
You're moving your hands, and then when you move the left hand, you're moving the microphone. So
I'm sorry. So the question was, the javana process comes to the mind door, and at the mind door you decide whether the act, what's come through this process is wholesome or unwholesome. And we make the right effort to say no. This is So where does? So it's at the mind door after the
sense door process.
After the sense door process, where you decide whether or not the unwholesome, whether what's come through the sense doors is wholesome or unwholesome. And so somewhere in the mind you have to do that.
Though according to the Abhidhamma, and this is something I have some scruples or doubts about myself, but this is just what the system says, that already in the sense door process, in the javana stage, already there's the tendency to the unwholesome or to the wholesome has already arisen there.
Before the javana process.
It's in the javana process, but it's in the javana stage. But it's in the javana stage of the bare sense door process. Already the tendency towards the unwholesome or the wholesome is there. But then, if it's a strong enough object, that sense door process will be followed by a series of mind door processes in which the object is more clearly defined and one's attitude towards the object is becomes more strengthened. And it's in that stage that one can really clearly understand whether one is engaging, the mind process is engaging in the unwholesome and the wholesome, and then one could apply the right effort to stop the unwholesome and to turn towards the wholesome.
So that's when the sampajana kind of awareness.
Yeah, that's where I would say that this function of mindfulness and clear comprehension becomes more prominent.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, I think we could take one question now from the internet, and then we'll have to break for the lunch. But if you have your questions, you can make a note of them and bring them up later. So, okay. Tara?
The question is Nibbana possess all three characteristics of Ananda, Anicca, and Dukkha? Or it's just one characteristic of Ananda?
Say again?
He says, is Nibbana possesses all three characteristics of Ananda, Anicca, or Dukkha, or is just one characteristic of Ananda? And he following the next question is, or this Nibbana is out of scope for three characteristics?
I think that question is not relevant to what I presented this morning. So I want to keep the questions, as I said, that they have to be relevant to what I presented. We're going to come to Nibbana tomorrow, so maybe then the person can bring the question up. Okay, I think we're supposed to stop. Yeah, we're supposed to stop at 11:20, and it's 11:22 now. Okay, so we'll end for the morning. We'll end with 3 half bows to the Buddha.
We bow to the Buddha. Bow to Bande.